A lot of you cared, just not enough. And that is what I needed to find out. And I did find out, and I'm sorry. Those are the final words of Hannah Baker, the main character from Jay Asher's novel, 13 Reasons Why. Now, this is one of these books that, as far as banned books go, probably one of the most controversial, and that's saying quite something. So, we get into what the controversy is about and why this book still needs to be read. 13 Reasons Why isn't among the most banned books anymore because, well, its time has kind of come and gone. This book first came out in 2007, and throughout the previous decade, 2010s, in other words, 2010 to 2019, it was number 3 on the banned list of most banned and challenged books. And that peaked at number 1 in the year 2017, which happened to coincide with the year that the Netflix series of the same name was released. The story takes place immediately following the suicide of Hannah Baker, a high school student who had somewhat recently moved into this new city, and she sends out a series of tapes, and throughout these tapes, they follow different people who are named on the tapes, and they're basically forced to listen to the reasons why she committed this act. As is implied, she has 13 reasons, and she creates the tapes where each side lays out in detail what the incident was, the reason that kind of piled up, in total is all these reasons why she felt compelled to do what she did. And every time there's a new side, there's a new person who is implicated in some way. And although the end of the story is exactly how you would expect, these are all basically all the events leading up to what happened at the very first page of the story when her suicide is discovered. The culminating act here, the final side of the final tape, is actually a secretly recorded conversation with her and Mr. Porter, who is a school counselor. And basically the lack of support that she gets is kind of the final straw here. And so this leads her to that final quote, which you heard at the beginning. You're feeling like maybe some people do care or pretend to care, but it just wasn't enough. Now, though, Hannah's story is what this is all about, and she's, as I said, the main character, but she's not what I would call the protagonist, because really, this is Clay, one of her friends, who is on the tapes, and he has been delivered them for a reason. He listens to the tapes, but he's not necessarily one of the reasons or one of the bad reasons why. And actually, he was the closest thing to what she would have called maybe a support group or a friend here, someone who didn't betray her. But nonetheless, he's on it. He's part of her story. And so we follow him throughout the story, listening to each side. And so we're hearing it as if it's through his ears. In terms of story development, this is actually a very clever way to narrate this, that we not only get to hear it secondhand through somebody else, her version of things, because again, this takes place after she has already committed suicide. So as the tape is playing and we hear the dialogue that she has in them, he's kind of doing this play-by-play, and we get to hear his inner voice as well. Now, the reason that this story is banned, it's very obvious. It's just the topic itself, okay? It's not necessarily what is in the book in terms of the details. It's the fact that this discusses suicide, and this is a taboo topic for a lot of people, but especially because this is aimed at young adults, and it takes place in a high school setting with all teenage characters. And so the idea is that anybody who might be reading this book would be obviously influenced negatively. The worry here is that this would create some sort of a copycat situation. Those who have challenged this book, they said that this portrays suicide, so therefore it would normalize or even encourage it. When do we just completely avoid or ignore something, like pretend it doesn't exist? Is that helping the situation? Or, do we actually discuss this openly, but how do you do it in a way that is sensitive? So if you follow that line of thinking, you'd say, well, if there's a story, talk about a book or a movie or TV show, and again, this did have a Netflix series, which I'll get to in a minute. So if a book discusses fighting, when people fight each other, that could encourage people to want to fight and get physical and aggressive. And of course, we don't want our children going out fighting people. If there's a book that discusses war, well, that might encourage people to decide that war is normalized. This is the slippery slope theory. Now, following along with that, the other reason why this has been challenged and banned quite frequently is because of the concerns of what's called suicide contagion, although psychologists prefer the term imitation as opposed to contagion, which implies it's some sort of a virus, something that you can catch, against your will. So critics point to a report that was actually released by the National Institute of Mental Health in 2019, which suggests, very strongly implicates that the very month following the Netflix show's release, 13 Reasons Why, this was in April of 2017, there was a 28.7% increase in teen suicide for those aged 10 to 17 in the United States. They're going as so far as to say this was the reason, although at the very end it does state they cannot explicitly say that there is a causal link. Correlation, causation, not the same. But again, it's really hard to go that deep into detail and go and define whether this was a cause. This is just a topic that's too tough. And another reason why this has been challenged is there also are some depictions of sexual assault and underage drinking. So if you're a concerned parent or any parent of a teenager, you hear all this and you know what the book's about, you might say, why would I ever want my child to read this? So now let's get to what are the 3 reasons why this book, number 1, shouldn't be banned, but actually needs to be read. There is no dispute suicide is a very sensitive topic. It should be handled delicately, and it's an important issue, but that's why it needs to be discussed. It cannot just be completely ignored. In the middle of the story, in fact, Hannah, the character, she actually discusses how she tried to kind of bring this up in a roundabout way during open discussion in one of her classes, and was very easily dismissed, not only by the teacher, but by fellow students. They just don't want to think about it or deal with it. You know, the party line is ask for help, say something. And that's easier said than done. People don't feel comfortable doing that because it's something that people just don't want to hear about. Worldwide, suicide is the 15th leading cause of death. From ages 15 through 29, it's the 2nd leading cause of death. You know, this book really delves into so many other topics than just the incident itself. It talks about self-esteem, sense of identity, you know, relationships with others, community, a lot of the factors that ultimately may contribute to suicide ideation. I mean, big picture here, the reason why books in and of themselves shouldn't just be banned because they bring up uncomfortable topics. Ignoring them and avoiding them isn't going to make them any better. Reason number 2, well, a story like this, it places you in the shoes of somebody, or at least in the thought patterns, you know, of somebody who went through this process. And while parents might be concerned that this would lead you to think like her, no, what this does is creates empathy, enables you to see from a different perspective. And you know, maybe if you can relate to this person, this doesn't glorify suicide. It doesn't encourage it in any way. In fact, it does the opposite. The whole point of this, it ends with her apologizing, saying she's sorry. She didn't want to do this. And all the guilt that is left behind, all her friends, all the people who feel implicated in this, all the people that is affected, there's no way that you can say that the story in any way glorifies suicide. And there are also throughout the story, especially toward the end, you know, some pieces of advice where, you know, whether it's talked about in their counseling classes or not, things to look out for, signs. And she mentions specifically a couple of things which Hannah does in the story: a sudden change of appearance, like cutting off her hair, giving away possessions that seems unusual, right? Any change in behavior. And so these are things that can become useful tools for teens. And this goes back to my earlier point, is the protagonist of the story isn't Hannah, it's Clay. And throughout the entire book, you're thinking what he's thinking, you're feeling what he's feeling, and it's not good. It's not any sort of glorification here. And he struggles just to listen to this story. And you might struggle to read this. And that is the point. Clay and his friend Tony, who's also involved here, at the end, they start to go over what could they have said differently, what should they have done. And that's the bigger point here, is somebody needs to be that support group. Somebody needs to look out for these signs. And at the end, you know, it's kind of implied that Clay is going to use that information to help another person that he knows, an acquaintance, someone call it a friend, but somebody who now he sees the signs, now he recognizes them, and now maybe some good can come of this. All right, now reason number 3, and this really tackles the controversy head on. The book is not the same as the show. As I mentioned, this book came out in 2007, and it wasn't until years later that it really started to kind of be on the radar for these book banners. It really was after Netflix made it into a series. That's when the attention was drawn. That's when supposedly there were all these, you know, correlations to a jump in suicide. That's when it really became controversial. The book itself is different. Now, I can't say I've seen every episode of the series, I've seen parts of it, but I do know that it is not the same because, first of all, it goes on much farther, multiple seasons, and it strays away from the original material. It eventually seems to devolve into kind of a teen soap opera that mentions difficult topics, but it doesn't always treat them the right way. One review in The Guardian said that it was a show that comes across as slapdash and careless about the very problems it proclaims to take seriously. I think one thing that everybody can agree on is that media portrayal of suicide, whether it's through a book, TV series, movie, whatever it is, should be handled sensitively, and it doesn't seem like the show did this, but I don't feel that way at all about the book. If anything, this should have been just a short film, a mini series, maybe a limited series, but not to go on as long as it did. They advise that you should limit exposure to these kind of topics, right? A short time is fine, but multiple seasons is too much. And the main thing, the main issue that critics had with the show was that the fact that it actually portrayed the act itself, and that is not anything that is taken from the book. A study done by Hua Wang and Juliet Paris showed that 27% of the suicide-related scenes in the show actually violate World Health Organization standards in terms of the don'ts related to suicide portrayal in media. They took things too far. The final argument that book banners might make for this is that it should be the parents that are the ones who are responsible for bringing up this topic to their children, not a book, not a movie, anything like that. I agree that parents should have these conversations. It shouldn't be just a completely off-limits forbidden topic, and it should be handled the right way. But it doesn't mean that we should, in all forms of media, just not even mention this and pretend that it doesn't exist outside of the household. That's not reality. One critical review on a parenting website says that, quote, exposing them to others who committed suicide, whether in real life or via media, books, or the internet, increases the risk that an individual will consider, attempt, or die by suicide. This is a huge leap to take. To basically say, if you read it in a book or you see it in a movie, you're going to do it. And I do think it's ironic that in that very site, the link that leads to the word risk, it connects to the website 988 Lifeline, which is a very helpful resource. And if you scroll down on that website, there's an article right there saying why talking about suicide should be normalized. Now, obviously, they didn't bother to actually scroll down and look beyond the website homepage itself, but that's kind of the larger point here too. 13 Reasons Why may not be an easy book to read for some people, but it's an important book, especially for teens. I feel like I may have given more than 3 reasons there, but those are 3 of the main reasons why 13 Reasons Why is an important book to read. I appreciate your support, and make sure you also support your public libraries.